In the winter of 1834, 12 nuns at Sacred Heart Convent in rural Ohio died within 48 hours. All were found in their beds, peaceful and prayerful, with no signs of illness or injury. The youngest was 23, the oldest 47. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the local physician, examined the bodies and declared them in perfect health at the time of death. No poison, violence, or disease was found. For nearly 2 centuries, the Catholic Church kept the truth of what happened at Sacred Heart hidden. But recently discovered letters and testimonies shed light on a far darker truth than any supernatural explanation. Sacred Heart Convent, established in 1821, was isolated on 47 acres in southeastern Ohio, 12 miles from Millbrook. It had been founded to serve Catholic immigrants, and by 1834, Mother Superior Catherine Brennan ruled over 17 nuns who lived quietly and devoutly, supporting themselves through farming and teaching. The winter of 1834 was harsh, with snow piling up and temperatures dropping. Please give me a like and subscribe so I can be motivated to create more great videos. The nuns were prepared with ample food and firewood. Sister Mary Agnes, the convent's recorder, kept detailed logs including accounts of the strange deaths. Her handwriting became erratic as the events unfolded. On January 15th, Sister Mary Catherine, the youngest nun, didn't show up for matins. Mother Superior found her in bed, hands folded in prayer, with a smile on her face. Dr. Hartwell examined her and found no cause of death. The same peaceful scene was repeated 2 days later when Sister Mary Elizabeth was found dead in the same way. Dr. Hartwell was baffled, and after another examination, he reported that both women appeared to have died without reason. The remaining sisters, filled with unease, prayed harder, but the deaths continued. Mother Superior Brennan imposed extra prayer sessions and fasting, but the sisters' conversations increasingly centered on death, even expressing envy at the peace their departed sisters had found. Sister Mary Agnes noted that some of the sisters were beginning to speak of visions and experiences that made them appear less concerned with the living world. As the weather worsened and isolation intensified, the convent's once routine life became marked by an eerie atmosphere. Even Mother Superior Brennan, once firm, began to talk of the deaths as if they were divine blessings. The deaths, however, were only the beginning of a greater mystery that would haunt Sacred Heart for generations. Hans Hoffman, concerned after noticing the lack of activity at Sacred Heart Convent, tried to visit the sisters, but the deep snow made it impossible. He returned home frustrated, remarking that the convent seemed to be holding its breath. His words would prove prophetic. On January 21st, 4 days after the first death, Sister Mary Margaret was found in the same peaceful state as the others. As the convent's treasurer, known for her practical nature, she had apparently chosen to join her deceased sisters. Her accounting books were neatly arranged with a note in her handwriting. All earthly debts settled. The final accounting awaits. Dr. Hartwell, summoned once more through the worsening weather, arrived to find the remaining sisters gathered in the chapel. They appeared pale and ethereal, no longer the vibrant women he had known. Their behavior was strange, speaking in whispers, smiling at unseen things, and talking about feeling blessed or chosen. When Dr. Hartwell examined Sister Mary Margaret, he found the same impossible results. Her rosary was still clutched in her hands, and her body was warm, despite being dead for hours. The doctor grew increasingly disturbed, documenting that the sisters seemed to welcome death as a celebration rather than a tragedy. Sister Mary Agnes, still documenting everything noted in her records, that the sisters no longer discussed worldly matters, but only spoke of heaven and the joy awaiting them beyond life. The isolation grew complete, with snow piling higher and temperatures plummeting. The nuns were using their firewood at an alarming rate, but seemed unconcerned. On January 22nd, Mother Superior Brennan called for a special prayer session. The sisters' hymns, however, took on an eerie, otherworldly quality. Sister Mary Agnes, fearing something was calling her, wrote that she was afraid to listen too closely. The next morning, Sister Mary Magdalene was found dead, her expression peaceful, and in her hand a piece of paper with one word written on it: soon. Dr. Hartwell, now deeply troubled, insisted on examining the convent. In the basement, behind a hidden wall in the root cellar, he discovered a small chamber containing 13 wooden crosses, each bearing a sister's name. The crosses were arranged in a circle around a larger one, bearing the name of Mother Superior Catherine Brennan. Dr. Hartwell wrote in his journal, "This is not a series of natural deaths. The sisters have been preparing for their own deaths, marking them like appointments on a calendar. This is something far more sinister and organized." When Dr. Hartwell confronted Mother Superior Brennan, she did not deny the hidden chamber's existence, but smiled peacefully, saying, "God's will cannot be hidden forever, Doctor. What must be, will be." Sister Mary Agnes, now one of 13 surviving sisters, wrote in her records, "I no longer recognize the women I have lived with. They speak of death as if it were a wedding they are preparing for, as if they have received invitations to a celebration that I have not been invited to attend." The convent was now trapped in an unrelenting winter, with temperatures reaching 20 degrees below zero. The windows were frosted so thickly that it was impossible to see outside, and the building creaked under the weight of the ice and snow. The remaining sisters at Sacred Heart Convent had gathered around the fireplace, the only source of warmth in the frigid kitchen. But their behavior grew stranger by the day. Their prayers became urgent, as if they were calling to someone just beyond reach, and they spoke in whispers about an impending calling. Most disturbing of all, they began taking turns sitting vigil by the window that faced the cemetery, waiting for something only they could see. Trapped by the snowstorm, Dr. Hartwell became an unwilling witness to the unraveling of the community. Though his medical training told him that what he was witnessing was impossible, he could not deny the reality before him. The sisters were dying by choice. Yet their deaths remained a mystery. On the night of January 24th, as the wind howled violently, Sister Mary Agnes made a discovery that would change everything. Unable to sleep, she wandered through the convent and heard voices coming from the chapel. Peering through the door, she was struck with terror at the sight inside. The living sisters were gathered around the altar, but they were not alone. The deceased sisters, Mary Catherine, Mary Elizabeth, and Mary Margaret, stood among them, glowing with an otherworldly light, their lips moving in silent prayer. The dead sisters reached out to touch the living, and as they did, the faces of the living changed, filled with the same peace and joy as the deceased. Sister Mary Agnes wrote in her frantic record, "They are not ghosts. They are too solid, too real, something my mind cannot accept or understand." Mother Superior Brennan stepped into the center of the circle, surrounded by the dead sisters. Their hands reached out to touch her, and her expression became radiant, with a joy that seemed almost painful to witness. "Soon we will all be together," Mother Superior whispered. "The calling has come, and we must answer." The living sisters nodded in unison, their voices harmonizing in prayer that resonated from beyond the physical realm. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Terrified, Sister Mary Agnes fled the chapel and barricaded herself in her cell, spending the rest of the night writing desperately in her journal. She concluded, "They are not dying. They are being called, chosen, transformed into something I cannot understand." As the horror at Sacred Heart grew, she realized she was left behind unchosen, unable to comprehend what had overtaken her sisters. On the morning of January 25th, Sister Mary Agnes awoke to an unsettling silence. There were no morning prayers, no sounds from the kitchen, no movement in the convent. When she emerged, she found herself utterly alone among the living. The remaining 12 sisters had died in the night, each with the same peaceful expression, their rosaries in hand. But this time, Each held a piece of paper with the word "complete" written on it. Dr. Hartwell, who had been sleeping in the Mother Superior's office, woke to find Sister Mary Agnes in shock, sitting in the chapel staring at the altar where she had witnessed the impossible gathering the night before. When he approached her, she whispered, "They're not gone. They're waiting. All of them standing right there behind you." Dr. Hartwell turned to look, but saw nothing but the empty chapel. When Dr. Hartwell turned back to Sister Mary Agnes, he saw that she was holding a piece of paper that hadn't been there moments before. Written on it was a single word, "soon." In his medical journal, Dr. Hartwell would later describe the most chilling discovery of all the deaths of the final 12 sisters. Unlike previous deaths, these sisters did not die alone. They passed simultaneously at exactly the same moment, as if responding to a single irresistible call. Their faces were not merely peaceful, but ecstatic, filled with joy so profound that their bodies could not contain it. Dr. Hartwell wrote, 13 healthy women have died without cause, without illness, without injury. They have simply chosen to depart this world, drawn by something that defies all rational explanation. However, the most disturbing discovery came when Dr. Hartwell and Sister Mary Agnes revisited the basement. The hidden chamber which they had previously examined revealed a disturbing change. The 12 new crosses, each bearing the name of one of the deceased sisters, now lay flat on the altar alongside the cross bearing Mother Superior Brennan's name. Only one cross remained standing, the one for Sister Mary Agnes. Dr. Hartwell's growing horror led him to realize that the deaths were not random, but part of a carefully orchestrated ritual that was building to a moment when the entire community would be united in some otherworldly realm. Sister Mary Agnes, faced with the evidence of her own predetermined fate, began speaking in a voice that seemed not her own. "They call to me constantly now," she said. "Their voices are beautiful, full of peace and joy. They tell me I am the last, the completion of their sacred circle. Once I join them, their purpose will be fulfilled." Driven by desperation, Dr. Hartwell delved into the convent's records, uncovering a journal that revealed the true nature of the deaths. The journal contained a correspondence between Mother Superior Brennan and a mysterious figure known only as the Shepherd. After hours of deciphering the code, Dr. Hartwell uncovered a chilling truth. The deaths were not spontaneous religious experiences, but part of a carefully planned ritual. The Shepherd had convinced Mother Superior Brennan that the sisters had been chosen to serve as a bridge between the living and the dead. The ritual required the willing sacrifice of 13 sisters, each dying at precisely the right moment, to create a spiritual gateway for the dead to return and gather their living companions. Dr. Hartwell discovered that the Shepherd was not a religious figure, but Marcus Aldrich, a former seminary student expelled for heretical beliefs about death and resurrection. Aldrich had become obsessed with the idea that death was not an end but a transformation, and that properly prepared souls could return to guide others across the threshold between life and death. Through carefully crafted letters, he had manipulated the convent's faith, convincing them they were chosen for a divine purpose. The deaths, Dr. Hartwell realized, were not suicides in the traditional sense. They were acts of faith, with the sisters genuinely believing they were serving a holy purpose. As Dr. Hartwell read through Aldrich's disturbing methodology, it became clear that he had been using religious devotion and isolation to conduct experiments in what he called spiritual engineering. By targeting particularly devout and isolated communities, Aldrich had exploited their faith to convince them that they were fulfilling a divine mission. The deaths at Sacred Heart were just one part of a much larger twisted plan. Aldrich's true goal was to create a method to convince religious communities to commit mass suicide, believing they were serving a higher calling. The last entry in Sister Mary Agnes's record book was written in a trembling hand, revealing the final truth behind the deaths at Sacred Heart Convent. "They are all here with me now," she wrote. "I can see them more clearly than ever. They stand in a circle around me, their faces glowing with a light from within. Their voices join in a harmony that makes my heart ache. They say the door between worlds is almost open, and one more willing soul is needed to complete the bridge. Dr. Hartwell, now fully understanding the horrific scope of Aldrich's plan, realized with growing terror that the shepherd's influence reached far beyond Sacred Heart. The sisters were victims of a calculated campaign of mental manipulation disguised as spiritual guidance. The tragedy could have been prevented if only the truth had been uncovered sooner. As Dr. Hartwell's investigation unraveled the depths of Aldrich's deception, he was left to confront a nightmare far darker than any he had imagined. The deaths at Sacred Heart were not the result of divine intervention, but a carefully executed plan to manipulate faith and push religious devotion to its most extreme and devastating conclusion. The man Marcus Aldrich had not merely convinced the sisters to die. He had engineered an elaborate psychological conditioning program that made them desire death. Through a carefully crafted mix of religious imagery, isolation, and repeated suggestions, he led them to believe that their earthly lives were mere obstacles to a higher spiritual existence. Aldrich's letters revealed how he had instructed Mother Superior Brennan to introduce ideas about the chosen ones, who would be called to serve God in a special way. He provided her with specific prayers and meditations designed to make the sisters more receptive to suggestion and detailed instructions on how to interpret unusual events as divine signs. Most insidiously, Aldrich exploited the sisters' love for each other as a tool of manipulation. Each death was presented not as a tragedy, but as a blessing that the remaining sisters should envy. The peaceful expressions on the faces of the deceased were used as proof that they had found something beyond life, which made the living sisters eager to follow them. Aldrich turned their greatest strength, their love for God and each other, into an instrument of their destruction. Dr. Hartwell wrote, "These women died believing they were being obedient to divine will, when in fact they were obeying the twisted fantasies of a madman who exploited their faith for his own purposes." As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Dr. Hartwell realized he had to act fast to save Sister Mary Agnes. But when he arrived at the chapel to warn her, he found her kneeling before the altar, her arms outstretched as if embracing invisible figures. "Doctor," she said without turning around, "they have shown me such beautiful things. They have shown me the place where pain ends and joy begins, where the weight of this world falls away like old clothes. How can I turn away from such a gift?" Dr. Hartwell tried to explain the truth to her, reading from Aldrich's letters to show how the deaths were not divine callings, but the result of psychological manipulation. He told her how her visions and the peaceful expressions on the dead sisters were the predictable result of conditioning, not supernatural phenomena. But Sister Mary Agnes smiled with the same serene expression that had marked all the previous deaths. "You see only the surface of things," she said. "You see death where there is transformation. You see loss where there is gain. My sisters are not gone. They are more alive than ever, and soon I will join them in that greater life." Desperate, Dr. Hartwell attempted to physically remove her from the chapel. But as he reached for her, Sister Mary Agnes whispered a single word: "Now." In an instant, her body went limp and she collapsed into his arms. Her face radiated peace, her lips curled into a gentle smile. Like the others before her, she showed no signs of illness or injury. She had simply chosen to stop living, responding to a call that only she could hear, a call carefully planted in her mind by Aldrich. Dr. Hartwell, now the only survivor of the Sacred Heart Convent tragedy, spent 3 days alone in the building caring for the bodies of 14 women who had died for reasons that, though explainable, were horrifying. When the weather finally cleared enough for him to return to Millbrook, he was forever changed, burdened by the knowledge of how easily faith could be twisted by those seeking to exploit it. In his final report to the county authorities, Dr. Hartwell attributed the deaths to an unknown contagion that had been contained by the convent's isolation. The bodies were buried in a mass grave in the Sacred Heart Cemetery, and the convent was sealed by order of the Catholic Church. But Dr. Hartwell's private journals, discovered after his death in 1867, reveal a different truth. In them, he documents not only the events at Sacred Heart, but his subsequent investigation into similar occurrences at religious communities across the country. What he found was a pattern of tragedies spanning nearly a decade. A convent in Virginia where 8 nuns died in their sleep, all found with peaceful expressions and notes reading, "Called home." A monastery in Pennsylvania where 12 monks died after a supposed divine visitation. A Baptist mission in Tennessee where an entire congregation of 23 people perished during a prayer meeting, their faces showing the same inexplicable joy that had marked the Sisters of Sacred Heart. All of these deaths had been attributed to various natural causes, disease accidents, or acts of God. But Dr. Hartwell realized they were all connected by one chilling figure, Marcus Aldrich. Local authorities, lacking the medical knowledge to explain the phenomena, had accepted the explanations offered by surviving religious leaders or visiting physicians. However, Dr. Hartwell's investigation uncovered the common thread that connected the deaths. Marcus Aldrich, the self-styled shepherd, who had perfected the art of turning faith into a weapon of mass destruction. Dr. Hartwell's research led him to Aldrich's early writings, published under various pseudonyms in obscure theological journals. In these papers, Aldrich outlined his theories on the spiritual engineering of religious communities. He's asserting that true faith required the complete surrender of earthly attachments, including attachment to life itself. He believed that under the right guidance, religious communities could transcend worldly existence, serving as a model for the wider world. In Aldrich's mind, the deaths were not tragedies, but triumphs, proof that his methods could override the basic human instinct for survival. Dr. Hartwell's findings also revealed that Aldrich had not acted alone. He had developed a network of followers, often former seminary students or disillusioned clergy who infiltrated communities long before Aldrich made contact. These followers provided Aldrich with detailed information about religious practices and leadership structures, preparing the ground for his manipulation. More disturbingly, Dr. Hartwell discovered that the events at Sacred Heart were only one experiment in a much larger program. Aldrich had been refining his methods, aiming to condition entire communities for mass death, while maintaining the appearance of natural or divine causation. His goal was not isolated incidents, but a large-scale demonstration involving hundreds, if not thousands, of people. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were merely test subjects in a twisted laboratory of faith. Despite Dr. Hartwell's relentless pursuit, Aldrich remained remarkably elusive. His trail led to false identities and abandoned residences across the eastern United States. In the summer of 1835, Dr. Hartwell traced him to a small town in western Pennsylvania. But when he arrived, Aldrich had vanished, leaving only a single sheet of paper in a rented room with the words, "The work continues." Some believed Aldrich fled to avoid prosecution, while others suspected he had joined one of the communities he manipulated, dying with them, for his distorted vision of spiritual transcendence. Dr. Hartwell, however, believed Aldrich had simply moved on to new, more vulnerable communities, possibly to the expanding frontier where isolated religious groups were even more susceptible to his manipulation. In his final journal entry, Dr. Hartwell concluded that the most terrifying aspect of the tragedy was not that one madman could convince so many to die for his delusions, but that his methods were so effective and perfectly calibrated to exploit the human desire for meaning and transcendence. They were methods that could be replicated by anyone with enough knowledge of human psychology and religious devotion. The Sacred Heart Convent stood empty for nearly 40 years before being demolished in 1873. The land was sold to a farming family, the Johnsons, who reported nothing unusual except that their livestock refused to graze where the convent had stood. The animals would approach to within 50 yards of the site, then turn away as if sensing something beyond human perception. The cemetery remains to this day, though the wooden crosses marking the graves have rotted away, leaving only slight depressions in the earth to indicate where the sisters lie. Over the years, local residents have reported strange phenomena in the area. But the true horror of what happened at Sacred Heart Convent remains shrouded in mystery, a tragic reminder of how faith can be manipulated for dark, devastating purposes. Reports from the area surrounding Sacred Heart Convent have lingered through the years. Lights moving among the graves on winter nights, the sound of women's voices singing hymns in a language that no one can identify, and an overwhelming sense of sadness that settles over visitors. Whether these reports are truly supernatural or simply the power of suggestion working on people who know the tragic history of the site remains uncertain. What is undeniable, however, is the chilling reminder that the story of Sacred Heart offers about the corruption of faith. It serves as a potent warning of how easily devotion can be manipulated by those who understand its power and are willing to exploit it for personal gain. Dr. Hartwell's case files were donated to the Ohio Historical Society after his death, where they were largely forgotten until the 1920s. It wasn't until similar mass deaths began to unfold in other parts of the country, such as the Jonestown Massacre, the Heaven's Gate suicides, and the Branch Davidian tragedy, that researchers began recognizing the patterns Dr. Hartwell had identified nearly a century earlier. Modern psychologists studying Dr. Hartwell's records have described Aldrich's methods as a nearly perfect example of what is now known as coercive persuasion or thought reform. By combining isolation, repetitive indoctrination, and the gradual erosion of critical thinking, Aldrich was able to convince his victims that their own deaths were not only acceptable, but desirable. What makes the Sacred Heart case particularly disturbing? Noted Dr. Margaret Chen, a specialist in cult psychology, is the precision with which Aldrich manipulated the religious convictions of his victims. He didn't attack their faith. He weaponized it, turning their deepest beliefs into tools of their destruction. This case highlights how faith, when distorted by those who seek to exploit it, can become a weapon capable of destroying even the most devoted souls. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were not evil. They were faithful and loving women manipulated by someone who understood their devotion and used it against them. Their deaths serve as a reminder that even the most sacred beliefs can be corrupted by those seeking power and control, and that vigilance requires not just faith, but the wisdom to recognize when that faith is being exploited. The tragedy also underscores the importance of community oversight in religious life. The isolation that the sisters had once viewed as a blessing became the factor that made them vulnerable to Aldrich's manipulation. Had they maintained stronger connections to the outside world? Or had there been visits from church authorities not influenced by Aldrich? The conditioning process leading to their deaths might have been interrupted before it reached its horrific conclusion. Perhaps most importantly, the story of Sacred Heart reminds us that evil often wears the mask of righteousness, and the most dangerous predators are those who cloak their intentions in spiritual enlightenment. The sisters died believing they were serving God, when in reality they were serving the twisted ambitions of a man who saw their faith as something to exploit rather than honor. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that the deaths at Sacred Heart were truly the result of psychological manipulation? Or was something more supernatural at work? Were the sisters victims of a madman's delusion, or did they genuinely discover something beyond death that called to them? Could such systematic manipulation of religious faith happen again in our modern world? Or have we learned enough from tragedies like this to prevent their recurrence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this chilling tale and want more like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. More hidden secrets in America's religious history are waiting to be uncovered, stories of faith tested and innocence lost that few dare to tell. If you're brave enough, we'll explore them together, one terrifying truth at a time. See you in the next video, where we'll delve into another chapter of America's hidden religious mysteries. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.